Hello everyone and welcome back to the program. No city on earth stirs up passion and interest quite like the city of Jerusalem. It really is remarkable seeing how much this city is in the news. But if you understand anything about Bible history and prophecy, you know why. The truth is, no city on earth stirs up God's passion like Jerusalem. On today's program, we'll see why Jerusalem comes under intense scrutiny today and see why this city is so important to God.
The Trumpet Daily.
Jerusalem, which means city of peace, is mentioned more than 700 times in the Bible. It has a long and celebrated history that goes back thousands of years. Most people think Israel's history with Jerusalem began with King David in the 11th century BC. In fact, Israel's attachment to Jerusalem goes back further than that. It goes back more than 4,000 years. You can read about it in Genesis 14, right at the beginning of the Bible. That chapter talks about the great patriarch Abraham visiting Jerusalem and dining with the king of Salem. Abraham even paid tithes to Jerusalem's king. If you look into the life of Abraham, you see that his behavior, his lifestyle, all of his ambitions, really his entire identity, it was all shaped by Jerusalem, by his relationship with this high priest and king in Jerusalem. It was shaped, his life was shaped by this hope in the prophecies about Jerusalem. In fact, the Apostle Paul in the New Testament, he wrote about Abraham looking to or envisioning a time when God would establish a new Jerusalem on this earth. The Apostle Paul taught that our faith, it must be established on the sure foundation of New Jerusalem. King David, he had that kind of strong and unwavering faith. And just like his forefather Abraham, King David's life revolved around Jerusalem. He established Jerusalem to be Israel's capital. He fortified that city as the seat of Israel's political, cultural, and religious identity. Moving on from David, if you consider the crowning achievement of his son Solomon, it was the construction of the magnificent first temple in Jerusalem. And then after Solomon's death, of course, Israel split into two nations, and you had the northern 10 tribes in Samaria. But then you had the southern 2 tribes, those tribes that established a kingdom in and around Jerusalem, and the house of David ruled from that throne in Jerusalem for centuries. What a history! What a history revolving around this city, the city of Jerusalem. Let's begin our study today in the book of Jeremiah, because this city, as glorious as some of that history is that I just went through, this city has also had a lot of trouble. This city it's been caught between violence and enemy nations fighting over this city. Blood has flowed in this city, and here in Jeremiah's prophecy, it talks about this city being buried under heaps, as it says here. Jeremiah 9 and verse 11, it says, "And I will make Jerusalem heaps and a den of dragons, and I will make the cities of Judah desolate without an inhabitant." That's a prophecy of God. And if you go back and look at some of that ancient history that I covered after Solomon and the people of Israel dividing in two, and then all of these prophets that God sent, first to Israel, warning them to get back to God and His truth, His law, and then Israel being taken into captivity by the Assyrians, and then God sending prophets to Judah, the southern nation, the nation revolving around Jerusalem. and saying, look, don't follow after the treacherous ways of your sister. Repent, turn to God. Well, Judah eventually went into captivity as well, and Jerusalem was destroyed by the Babylonians in the 6th century BC. That's been the history, and there have been heaps added to that destruction ever since. Of course, the Jews came back. King Cyrus, he knew about, the Persian King Cyrus, he knew about the attachment that the Jews had to the city of Jerusalem, and so he allowed a remnant to go back 70 years on after the destruction of the city. And that remnant went back and they rebuilt the city, they rebuilt the walls around Jerusalem, and they also built or established the second temple. It wasn't as glorious as Solomon's, but still, what an attachment these Jews had to that holy city. You can read about that in the books of Ezra and Nehemiah in the Old Testament. But then, of course, moving on to the 1st century, you read about it in the Gospels and the book of Acts, and just knowing the history that happened after so many of those apostles died or were martyred for Christ and His work, we know that the city of Jerusalem was again destroyed by the Romans, utterly destroyed. And then the 2,000 years since that time, here again, it's gotten caught in the crossfire. For many centuries there, during the Crusades, back and forth, fighting in and around Jerusalem. And of course, in our modern day, you see a lot of nations trying to get in there and to sort out the problems or the divisions or the competition over this city, the city of Jerusalem. Let's look at the book of Zechariah. This is Zechariah chapter 2. Of course, more recently, I think most people are familiar with the history from the 20th century, Israel being established as a state back in 1948, and then the city of Jerusalem being united under Israeli rule in 1967. And all of this, this was prophesied actually. When you consider some of the prophecies that we're going to go through here today, you know that there had to be a Jewish state in this end time, and you know that the city of Jerusalem had to be unified under Jewish rule in this end time. Let's just look at, first of all, again, what has happened historically to nations that have gotten in there and tried to solve the problems of Jerusalem. It's the center of 3 major religions in many ways, or at least for Christianity and Judaism in particular, but certainly the Muslims consider it to be a very holy city as well. Lots of division, as I say, down through history, revolving around this city. But notice what this prophet says, Zechariah 12 and verse 2. It says, "Behold, I will make Jerusalem a cup of trembling unto all people, all the people round about, when they shall be in the siege, both against Judah and against Jerusalem." A cup of trembling, it says, or a cup of reeling. I'm going to make Jerusalem a cup of reeling. Notice what my father had to say in this booklet. This is the one we're going to be offering on today's program, Jerusalem in Prophecy. And there's so many prophecies that revolve around just this one city. As I say, it's mentioned in the Bible hundreds and hundreds of times. Just right here in the book of Zechariah, it's mentioned 41 times. This is one of the minor prophets. This is just one book. And Zechariah had a lot to say about this city because it factors into so many prophecies. As I said there at the top, it really factors into so much history. It goes back thousands of years, even as far back as Abraham. But notice what my father wrote in this booklet. It says here, "Every nation which has ruled Jerusalem has experienced serious problems. This is true up to the present day." So many people want it. So many religions want it. So many people are willing, so many nations and peoples and religions are willing to fight for it. There was a book not too many years ago titled that, "The Fight for Jerusalem." And yet everyone that gets control, like he says there, then experiences a lot of trouble. Well, look at what the prophecy says. It's a cup of trembling or a cup of reeling. The next verse, Verse 3 in Zechariah 12 says, and in that day will I make, this is an end-time prophecy, and God says, and in that day will I make Jerusalem a burdensome stone, or a heavy stone, for all people, it says. All that burden themselves with it shall be cut in pieces, though all the people of the earth be gathered together against it. See, it's such a heavy burden to any nation or to any group of nations that gets involved. And how can you deny this? I mean, just in looking at the history and looking at the heaps and heaps and heaps of ruin, I mean, nothing really does show just how incapable man is of solving the problems of man than this one city. The prophet Jeremiah, I read from that earlier, but he said it's not in man to know or to be able to direct his own steps. We need God's guidance. And in fact, God established this city anciently, and it means the city of peace. And as you'll see in the next segment, God has quite a future planned for this city. So he has a lot to say about it, but everything that man has done to try to get in there and to solve the problems of this city, to try to fix it, to try to make it an international city, to try to make it where every nation or religion is happy, everyone that's gotten involved with it has found out right away, this isn't as easy as we thought. In fact, it's kind of like a heavy stone around our neck. Notice again, from Jerusalem in prophecy, my father said, God said the Jerusalem problem would be a nightmare for peacemakers and diplomats who get entangled with it, not to mention the people who call it their home. And yet, it seems that every nation wants Jerusalem. Every nation wants it, but it's been such a nightmare for diplomats, for peacemakers, for those that oversee the so-called peace process, the negotiations, time and again, they end up not working, or they end up with both sides, or three sides, or four sides walking away from the table because man hasn't been able to solve it. Let's just look at one more prophecy quickly before we break. The prophet Hosea, as I said, there's lots of prophecies that factor into this city, and much of it is covered in this booklet, Jerusalem in Prophecy. And then more broadly, you have this one, the King of the South, which has a lot to do, or talks a lot about just the prophecies pertaining to the Middle East and all of these powers that are at play here. God has so much to say about it and covers quite a lot of detail, including here in Hosea. This is Hosea 5 and verse 13. It says, and when Ephraim saw his sickness, and Judah, that's the little nation that's called Israel today, the Jews, they made up a nation in 1948 with the help of others, and that's the little Jewish state, or that southern kingdom that was Judah. But of course, there were the Israeli or the Israelite tribes, the northern tribes anciently as well. In any event, Ephraim's one from the northern 10 tribes. It says, and when Ephraim saw his sickness and Judah saw his wound, then went Ephraim to the Assyrian and sent to King Jareb, yet could he not heal you, nor cure you of your wound. Then, you see, they go. Once they realize that they're wounded, or that there's a sickness there. And again, my father goes into this really in both of these booklets. But once they realize, my father has said, that this sickness or this wound, it has to do with the peace process and the inability of man to solve the problem of Jerusalem. And all that it's done, really, for Israel, the little modern Middle Eastern state, all that it's done is it's weakened them. It's sickened them. And they're going to go, prophecy says, and seek help from the Assyrians, or modern-day Germany. They're going to seek help from Europe. And you can look for Europe to get more involved in the Middle East peace process as America is on the way out. And many are already saying, look, America has disqualified itself. America has taken sides. So they need to be moved out. And we need to have a more objective body come in and work to bring peace to this region, or to bring peace to this disputed city. That's what your Bible has to say. And of course, if you back up to verse 5, Hosea says, "And the pride of Israel does testify to his face. Therefore shall Israel and Ephraim fall in their iniquity. Judah also shall fall with them." There's quite a few prophecies that talk about the division between these brother nations, the United States and Britain and Judah. And this prophecy here talks about all three of them being weakened and getting sick or being wounded right here in these last days. And what it leads to is what's described right there in verse 5. There's another verse over in Isaiah that talks about Manasseh devouring Ephraim, and then Ephraim and Manasseh, and it says together they shall be against Judah. Just a lot of fighting even between these brothers that have traditionally been allies. They've traditionally worked together. Just one more verse here, back to the book of Zechariah. This is Zechariah 14, Zechariah 11. Here again, just to talk about this division among the brothers. It says, "Then I cut asunder mine other staff, even bands," it says, "that I might break the brotherhood between Judah and Israel." So there's these prophecies that really talk about a separation or a division between little Israel or Judah and the support that it traditionally has received from the United States and Britain. That support is on the wane. And as I say, you can look at these prophecies and know that the Europeans are going to be getting more involved in the Jerusalem question. Make sure that you request these 2 free booklets. This is the King of the South booklet by my father, written as early as 1994, I think it is. And then this one, a little more recent than that, Jerusalem in Prophecy. These two will be wonderful guides for you as you understand the prophecies of God and what He has to say about this little region, about this city, and why it factors into so many prophecies for this end time. We'll be right back.
God established Jerusalem to be a city of peace. But instead of peace, Jerusalem has endured a 6,000-year legacy of unparalleled suffering, bloodshed, and violence. Today, it is weighed down with unsolvable problems. Central to the beliefs of Judaism, Islam, and Christianity, no city on earth is fraught with as much international tension as Jerusalem. Every effort to solve the impasse over Jerusalem has ended in failure. But there is very good news. This blood-soaked city will soon become a city of peace. This city is extremely important to God, like no city on earth. Jerusalem will soon dazzle the world with godly brilliance. Instead of blood, peace will flow out of Jerusalem like a river, and the entire world will soon be looking to this city for leadership and comfort. God says He shall yet choose Jerusalem. If you would like to learn more about Jerusalem's magnificent future, please request our free book, Jerusalem in Prophecy.
So man has his plans for the city of Jerusalem, as I said at the top of the show. I mean, that city really does stir up passion, and in a lot of ways, a lot of hatred and anger as well. But man has his plans, his ideas for the future of this city, and God has His. God's are sure. God has quite a plan and purpose for this city. And that's what we'll conclude with on today's program, continuing our study in Zechariah. Let's go to chapter 14. Here again, this is a prophecy we refer to often in our literature and also in our Trumpet magazine, this monthly publication. It's free. We offer it free and without cost or follow-up, and it really will help for you to understand your world, the events that we see playing out in these last days and the significance of them according to Bible prophecy. If you haven't subscribed yet, make sure that you become a Trumpet subscriber. Here in Zechariah 14, it says, "Behold, the day of the Lord comes, and your spoil shall be divided in the midst of you. For I will gather all nations against Jerusalem," it says, "to battle. And the city shall be taken, and the houses rifled, and the women ravished. And half the city shall go forth into captivity, and the residue of the people shall not be cut off from the city." So for half the city to go into captivity, as this verse prophesies, it means that the whole city had to come under the rule of the people of Judah. I mean, this is a prophecy, really. It's a prophecy that says there would be a Jewish state and that it would have control over the entire city. But right before the Great Tribulation and the return of Jesus Christ, God says this city is going to be divided, and it's all according to God's plan. Let me show you what my father said in his Zechariah booklet. So God begins to gather all nations, beginning with half of Jerusalem falling to the Arabs. That event triggers a series of events that lead to Christ's battle in Jerusalem. So really, this prophecy is about God gathering, because if you continue reading, this is in verses 3 and 4, it says, "Then shall the Lord go forth and fight those nations," plural, all nations that gather to Jerusalem, as when he fought in the day of battle, and his feet shall stand in that day upon the Mount of Olives, which is before Jerusalem on the east. And it goes on to talk about the Mount of Olives splitting in two. I mean, that's the mount right there to the east of the old city. I mean, we've been there so many times over the years. God's college, excavating in the city of David, excavating on the Ophel, and just looking right across the way, you see this large Mount of Olives that Jesus Christ traversed. And that's where he's going to return to this earth. That's what Zechariah 14 is saying. Look down at verse 10. It says, "All the land shall be turned as a plain from Geba to Rimmon, south of Jerusalem, and it shall be lifted up and inhabited in her place." This is God's plan for the city. It says, "From Benjamin's gate unto the place of the first gate, unto the corner gate," and so on. Lang's commentary says about this prophecy, how that the whole land is to be leveled to a plain in order that Jerusalem may be elevated. And of course, the reason for that is because God wants to put that city up on display. That's God's headquarters city. That's the city from which Jesus Christ will rule. He's coming back, as Revelation says, as King of kings and Lord of lords. And Jerusalem is to be his city. And Jerusalem is to be a city of peace, finally, once the government of God is established there. And you look at this dramatic, all these miracles that God works out. I mean, as I say, we've been over there and we've excavated in several areas in and around the old city. But you talk about some major excavations or renovations going on. God changing the topography, God lowering some portions and then raising up Mount Zion so that city might shine forth as an example for all the world. Langs continues saying, "The capital, seated on her hills, shines conspicuous as the only elevation in a very wide region." See, just like a shining city on a hill. We're to be lights, Jesus said. "Let your light so shine." And in the world tomorrow, that city will shine. Shine forth. Let me just read to you. This is over in Isaiah's prophecy, chapter 2. This is talking about the wonderful world tomorrow. "And it shall come to pass in the last days that the mountain of the Lord's house shall be established in the top of the mountains and shall be exalted above the hills." This is the same prophecy, God exalting this holy city, "and all nations shall flow unto it." It's talking about Jerusalem and the world tomorrow. That's what these prophecies are referring to. This is God's city that we're talking about. No wonder it's mentioned more than 700 times in Scripture. No wonder it factors into so many end-time prophecies. We're reading about just a few of them here. Let's conclude in the early part of Zechariah, Zechariah chapter 1. Zechariah chapter 1, I read in the first segment, Jeremiah's prophecy, where it just says there's going to be heaps of destruction brought on top of this city. And you can see that when you excavate there. You go down a foot or you go down 3 or 4 feet, and you just go through one period, one layer after another layer after another layer. Here's a layer that conquered the previous layer, and you have all this destruction, all of these ruins, all of these finds, all the pottery and so on that you can date those particular periods to. Heaps upon heaps of destruction. And yet here, God is about to establish this city as his headquarters. This is Zechariah 1, verse 17, cry yet, saying, thus says the Eternal of hosts, my cities through prosperity shall yet be spread abroad, and the Eternal shall yet comfort Zion, and shall yet choose Jerusalem. God will yet choose Jerusalem. That's future. And this is a time when it's going to really bring comfort to this world and peace to this world. Not fighting, not ongoing negotiations that end in ruin. But here's real comfort. Chapter 2, just one page over. Chapter 2, verse 9 in Zechariah says, for behold, I will shake my hand upon them, and they shall be a spoil to their servants, and you shall know that the Eternal of hosts has sent me. Well, then the next couple of verses is where it talks about God again choosing Jerusalem. Look down at verse 12. And the Eternal shall inherit Judah, his portion in the Holy Land, and shall choose Jerusalem again. Choose Jerusalem again. And then you can read, we already read that verse in Isaiah 2. You can read again in Zechariah 14 and see where all nations are going to flow in and out of Jerusalem in the wonderful world tomorrow. These prophecies, so many of them, they're discussed in this wonderful little booklet, Jerusalem in Prophecy. Request your free copy today, and also the King of the South booklet, and then subscribe to our Trumpet magazine as well. Thank you for joining us today, and we'll see you next time.